Thanks, Brad, for having me out here. And like you said, we just met like about a month ago?
Yeah.
A month ago. And we just hit it off, you know. And one of the passions that I have is adding value to people, right? And you'll hear some, what I'm going to do today is just share some stories and some tidbits on, you know, how I got to where I am today, right? And hopefully share some things that you guys can utilize, right, in your careers and so on and so forth, in your life as you go forward. Does that make sense? I'm a little older than you guys. My oldest child just turned 32 today. Brittany, yeah, she's 32. I have 3 boys. Derek Jr. is 24, Bobby is 23, and the baby of the bunch is Devin, he's 20. Interesting thing about my family, as you can see, this is my nephew. You'll notice something about us. We're very tall. My wife is 6'1", I'm 6'5". I have a son, Bobby is 6'6", Devin is 6'4", Derek is 6 foot. Brittany, who turned 32 today, is 5'6" and a half. You gotta give her half, right? So, but hey, you know, who does not know what Rotaract is about? Rotary, raise your hand. Don't know. So everybody knows that Rotary is the largest service-based organization on the planet, right? And it's all about serving, right? And as I tell people, serving is not something I do. It's a part of who and what I am, right? It's really embedded in me, and it's really a part of me. And you know, usually as a presenter, you have slides, but I don't have any slides, so I have cue cards just kind of keep me on track. Because as my wife will tell you, I'll be here, I'll talk all day. I can talk, I'll talk all day. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, right? And give you little bits of my journey. My name is Derek Higgs, as you mentioned. I'm from New York. Had an awesome family, mom, dad, little sister, and I had an awesome upbringing. When I was 14 years old, my life took a turn for the worse. I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, hanging out in the hallways and so on and so forth. And there came a time where I had to face some serious consequences, right? And instead of facing those consequences, I decided to run away from home, right? 14 years old, very knowledgeable, a lot of wisdom. I decided, hey, you know what? I don't need mom and dad. I'll run away from home. So there I was in New York, sleeping in pissy staircases, stealing food to eat. And life was pretty tough, right? There was a day when I think I was in Manhattan at the time, and I was walking across the street and I saw this man wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. And it was something about seeing him, and I saw myself, you know, I just kind of stopped in my tracks and I saw myself in a suit carrying a briefcase. Later on that night, I was in one of those busy staircases or whatever, and I decided, you know, I was gonna go home, right? I went home, had a very interesting conversation with my parents, right? Because they had rules. They tolerate a lot of crap, but they don't take no. Don't say it. Don't say it. But so I found myself the following day in juvenile detention. I was in a juvenile detention home. 14 years old. I was already 6'4". I only weighed 160 pounds. So you can imagine 6'4", 14 years old, and I walk into an institution with all these 17 and 16-year-olds walking around. So life was tough living on the streets, but it just got a lot tougher, right? And so many times, you know, you get out in the yard, you just put your back to the wall, start swinging until they break it up, right? But I was a target, 6'4", 160 pounds, and I'm in this, and I was a mama's boy. Don't get it wrong, you know, I wasn't one of these thugs or whatever. I was a mama's boy. But here I was in this environment with all these, I call them lions, right? And it was a very tough existence for a long period of time. Not very long, but for a few months, because I could only take with so much of that. But there was this time when we used to have TV time, right? So they had a TV up on the wall, and I think matter of fact, how many people here are over 35 years old? Okay.
Sorry, Derek.
Okay. Well, when I was younger, they had the Brady Bunch, Partridge Family, and things like that. One of those things was on TV, and they had a commercial came on, and there was this man in a suit carrying a briefcase, and I caught that vision of myself again. And long story short, I wound up running away from that place and ran back home. You know, of course, when somebody leaves that institution, they immediately alert the police, they call the parents, and so on and so forth. I got home, I had to break into my mom's house, because she wasn't home, she was at work, dad was at work. And when I got in, the phone rang. and it was my mom. She goes, oh, so you're home? And I said, yeah. She goes, well, stay right there. Your dad and I will be home soon. So they got home, and I begged them for a second opportunity, second chance. Because going back to, at the time, it was called Inwood House, was this juvenile detention center that I was in. Going back there was just, I just couldn't do it, right? And so they gave me a second opportunity. They reinstated me in high school. And while I was there, I put my 37-inch vertical to use, wound up earning a scholarship to college, and got to college, had an awesome academic experience. I had an internship on Wall Street. I was a teacher's assistant while I was in college. I was also a tutor. All of this and a full class load and playing basketball. And the beautiful thing was, when I graduated from college as a software engineer, I was able to start my career, right? And they required us to wear suits. So I saw myself in that suit, and I went out and got a briefcase. I didn't even have anything to put in it, but I just had to have that briefcase because there it was, my vision accomplished, right? And so guys, one of the things that I tell whenever I speak to people, and the last time I told this story was in front of 3,000. John Maxwell has a certification event that he gives twice a year. And they had a competition for speakers. And I was one of the top 15, and they gave us stage time to talk in front of 3,000 plus people. And when I told that story, I encourage people, especially younger folks, and I don't want to talk down to you guys, to have a vision for your lives. See, that vision that I had for my life took a 14-year-old boy, changed his priorities, right? It took him from sleeping in pissy staircases and stealing food to eat to working on Wall Street. Having a vision turned my life around. And it's very important that you guys have a vision for your lives. What about, let me get back over to my notes, I'll talk all day. Let me ask this question. How many of you are happy in your careers? Not all the hands went up. What do you do?
I work at 12 Stone Church.
Okay, who does not work at 12 Stone Church? Okay, what do you do?
I work in outreach coordination for a local nonprofit called Let 'Em Eat.
Awesome, I know you're happy with that, right?
So far.
So far, you?
I'm an independent contractor for music and graphic design.
Awesome, you like that job? Awesome. I'm gonna share a statistic with you guys. It just said, and this is something I got off of, I think it was Career Advice Online or something like that. It says the average person will change careers 5 to 7 times during their working life. Let me read that again. The average person will change careers 5 to 7 times during their working life. With the ever increasing number of career choices, 30% of workers, 30% of you guys, will change careers or jobs every 12 months. By the age of 42, which none of you are yet, you may have already had 10 different jobs or careers. I want you to think about that for a second. The reason why I want you to think about that is because I'm 54 now. About 3 years ago, I had a situation where I was on my way to work. And I listened to, as I was training to do what I do now, right? I listened to a lot of motivational speakers. So I believe that in order for you to pour out, you gotta have people pouring in. Does that make sense? So I was listening to a motivational speaker. At the time, I was a software engineer working in Alpharetta. And on my way to work, listening to, actually I'll tell you who it was. It was Miles Monroe, Pastor Miles Monroe, and believe it or not, Steve Harvey. So I'm listening to this compilation on one of the YouTube channels or whatever. And I was over on Pleasant Hill Road. Who knows where Shorty Howell Park is? Right. So you have Walmart on the left, Shorty Howell is on the right. And I was sitting there at a red light, and I was just bawling, in tears, crying. Crying so hard that I had to collect myself in order to drive, right? I was able to make it to work. I drove, got to work, and normally I'm that upbeat guy that comes in, good morning, hey everybody, high five, and so on and so forth. But that day was different. I couldn't. I remember walking by my boss's office, the VP of IT. He said, "Good morning." I just kind of said, "Good morning." I walked over to my desk, and my desk was in the corner, so I had a wall of windows here and a wall of windows there. And I remember looking out the window, and a few seconds later, I was on my way to the conference room. I called my wife, and she picked up the phone, and she goes, "Hey, babe." And I couldn't say anything. And she goes, "Babe?" And I couldn't find any words to say. And the third time when she said, "Babe, are you there?" And I said, the only thing I could think to say was, "I can't do this anymore." So one of the messages that I share with people who are younger than I is I never want you guys to go through what I went through. To be 51 years old and to be that miserable, I was making a very good six-figure salary. I was getting double-digit bonuses every year. Had the house, cars, kids. There was a time when kids went to private school. You would think I had it made, but I was miserable on the inside. And it's funny because when I stepped away from corporate America, which I did a couple of years ago to do what I'm doing now, John Maxwell wrote a book called Leaderships. Anybody familiar with that? Leaderships. There's 12 different shifts that he discusses in that book. One of them is called moving from career to calling. That day, when I went home to my wife and we made a decision, I say we, because it wasn't just me, right? We were one. We made a decision for me to leave corporate America and step into my calling versus being stuck in a career. Does that make sense? I share that with you guys because one of the things that I wanted to share with you all as I look at my notes that are out of order. I want you guys, do you guys know what a SWOT is? SWOT. We have two heads nodding. Anybody else? What's a SWOT?
What's your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats?
What's the difference between strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats? I put them on the spot.
Yeah.
All right. So this was something that I wish I would have had when I was much younger. He's right. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I want to do a little exercise.
I guess I would say some of those are internal and some of those are external.
Perfect. There he is. Give that man a. What are y'all drinking? I'm drinking water, by the way.
That's why they come to me right away.
But I wish I would have done this exercise when I was like I said, I talked down to you guys, but when I was you guys' age, if I was in my 20s and 30s, and I would have done this exercise. Now this is something you're gonna start tonight, right? You might just type it in on your phone, give it some thought, or what have you, but I encourage you to do a SWOT analysis. Believe it or not, a lot of you who work in corporate America, what have you, there are SWOT analyses being done on you. You just don't know it. Right? When they decide whether to keep you on or not, there is a SWOT analysis that they're doing. They're checking your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And he hit it right on the head. Strengths and weaknesses are those things that you have control of. Those are internal, not eternal, internal, okay? You have control over those. You can improve on your weaknesses. You can, your strengths, you can improve on your strengths. And I'm gonna get to the difference between the two in a second. Opportunities and threats are things you don't have control of. For instance, as a speaker, I can work on my speaking. Like for instance, right now, who can tell me what most speaking trainers would say that I'm doing wrong?
Hands in your pocket.
Perfect. Hands in your pocket. I took of course, went through the John Maxwell training. I also was in his mentoring program, and I took his master class. If you ever watch John Maxwell, he violates all the rules. Because the rules are basically you can do anything you want as long as it's not a distraction. Okay? As long as it's not a distraction. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a gentleman, and I told him the same thing. He was nervous, so what he decided to do was get one of those little, I think they call them fidgets. So he had this fidget in his pocket. So he's walking around and he's doing like this. And I'm in the back going, and as he's walking by, and it was similar to this, as he's walking by, young ladies are like, trying to get away from him. And at the end, I'm just sitting there going, my gosh. He goes, what? So I didn't say a word, but we showed him the playback, and he saw himself walking around, playing with his little fidget in his pocket. The fidget, not.
So we're talking about the same thing here.
Exactly. So, getting back to the SWOT, I encourage you guys, I want to spend a few minutes right now for you guys to internalize and be honest with yourselves. For instance, a couple of years ago, I was petrified to speak in front of people. And then I spoke in front of 3,000 plus people at the John Maxwell training, right? When you prepare, right, and you work on those so-called weaknesses, you'd be surprised some of the things you can do. People in my family, they couldn't believe when they saw the pictures of me walking around on the stage in front of, it's actually over 3,100 people, right? You can work on those weaknesses. How many people, let me ask a quick question. How many people are petrified to get up in front of an audience and speak? No, so all of you guys are comfortable just getting up and talking in front of people. That's awesome. Wow. This is the first time. Yeah. You want to come on up?
Yeah. Point taken.
This is the first time where I'm in front of a group, but nobody admitted it. Right? Somebody laughed. See, because I was actually absolutely petrified. Right? But after going through the training with John Maxwell, I was months later on stage, and I killed it. I'm not patting myself on that. I killed it. Had a standing ovation. For the rest of that weekend, my wife and I were like celebrities. People were coming up to us, taking selfies with us, and all kinds of stuff. And it was that's when I realized, when I stepped out onto that stage, after spending time working on what I thought was a weakness, didn't realize it was actually a calling. I never forget when he announced me, and I stepped up on the stage, he hands me the mic, and of course I'm nervous, and then as I turned and faced the audience, I had this feeling like, this is where I belong. And guys, it took going through a SWOT analysis, a self-SWOT analysis, where I began to realize that what I thought was a weakness was actually a calling, right? And I want you guys to spend some time. I'll give you guys, play some music or something for about 5 to 7 minutes. I want you guys to jot down what you think you can use your phone, what have you. I'm not gonna call on anybody. This is for you guys to take with you. Make sense? Yeah. Write down what you think your strengths and weaknesses are. Try to write down about 2 or 3 of each. Strengths, weaknesses. All right, awesome. So everybody has down there 2 to 3 strengths and 2 to 3 weaknesses, right? All right. The next thing I want you to do, and I'll explain why I'm having you do this in a second. Think about some of the things that you don't have control of. So your strengths and weaknesses are those things that you have control of. Things that you can improve on, things that you can make better, or what have you. You have control over those. Think about those things that you don't have control over. Opportunities, that's a positive, or a threat, negative. I'll give you an example. This year, back in early February, I recognized that there was a threat attacking my career that I did not have control over. That threat is COVID. Okay. All the speaking engagements for this year have been gone. You got calls saying, hey, you know what, we're gonna postpone it. Then it went from being postponed to being canceled. That was a threat that I saw coming back in February, right? John Maxwell, I didn't feel bad, because here's a guy, John Maxwell gets paid a 6-figure sum just to get up and do what I'm doing right now for 90 minutes. 90 minutes. He got on a call, I was on a call with us being on the mentoring program, and he talked about how all of his engagements were canceled. So I didn't feel bad, right? but at the same time I did, because I'm not a millionaire, He can have all his stuff canceled for a whole year and he's still good, right? Not me. I had to pivot. right? I had to think about what that threat was, and I had to pivot. So therefore, I had to look for opportunities. Where is there an opportunity? For instance, I didn't have a Zoom account until March. So when I recognized the threat, I had to pivot and look for opportunities that also offset that threat. Does that make sense? So I want you to spend about 5 to 7 minutes thinking about what threats are out there to prevent you from doing whatever it is you want to do. And what opportunities can you take advantage of, or opportunities that are out there that can help you pivot away from that threat. Make sense? Cue music. All right, so you may be asking yourself, well, why is he having me do a SWOT analysis? The SWOT analysis goes into your strategic plan. How many of you, by show of hands, have a strategic plan? Smile. Has a strategic plan for their life? 1, 2, okay. Most of you are like I was. I didn't have a strategic plan. You know, I grew up, my parents told me, hey, you know what, you want to go out, get good grades, right? So you can go get a good job, right? And that job should have good benefits. I did all that. I was a good software engineer. I was one of the best. I like to think I was. Like I said, I had a great career, awesome salary, the whole 9 yards. But I was chasing more so money than I was really who I really was and my true calling in life. Does that make sense? So one of the things that I encourage everyone, and there's been times when people will reach back to me and say, you know what? After hearing you, I started thinking about what am I really doing with my life? What am I really here for? What is my purpose? What is my purpose in life? Why am I here? When you start asking yourself those questions, you get beyond just having a career, right? You start thinking about what are those things that you're passionate about. And the key thing about having a SWOT analysis, that goes into your strategic plan. If you don't have a plan, you wind up being like me, just getting tossed to and fro from job to job. I was a contractor at one time where I had like 4 different jobs in a year, just going from contract to contract or what have you. Never really feeling fulfilled. Does that make sense? So I want you guys to think about that. I want you guys to, and also, can you give everybody my contact information? Do you have everybody? Yeah. Send them my contact information because I definitely want you all to feel free to ask me questions. You may not, you're going to have a question and answer here, but there may be things that may come up next week, the week after, a month later, what have you, and you may want to just say, you know what, Derek, I want to ask you about blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is, feel free to drop me an email, give me a call, what have you, because I'm all about providing value for others, right? And I really wish that I had somebody that spoke these kinds of things into me back when I was 28, 29, 30. Make sense? I'm gonna lighten it up a little bit. I found this thing on the internet called Career Path Puns. Are you ready? These are not mine. I used to be a banker, but then I lost interest. So then I became a baker because I needed the dough. You know, needed the dough. Hey, these aren't mine. But I couldn't make donuts anymore. I was tired of the whole thing.
You're a little too far.
I made a bad decision working at the funeral home. It's a dying industry. Only one more. I did enjoy being a watchmaker. I made my own hours. I'm not gonna read this last one.
Please read it.
But guys, I encourage you. And I'll be honest with you, I was somewhat arrogant when I was younger. I was a hotshot software engineer. And there were times in my life where I came across somebody who had little pearls of wisdom or what have you, but I really wasn't in a place mentally, emotionally, spiritually where I could listen, right? Because I was in my little arrogant stage, right? I ran into a gentleman back in my 40s. It's wild that I can say that back in my 40s. His name was Donald Brad. And he's a millionaire. And for some reason, he decided to mentor me. So I'm sitting there, and he asked me a question about what my plans were, and I'm just rattling off all this stuff, like I'm some know-it-all, right? And he sat there very patiently listening. And after I finished, He just looked me in the eye. He says, there's this thing I call the pile theory. And I said, the pile theory? He goes, yeah. If my pile is bigger than yours, then you should be listening. So now, did I A, get my ego involved and like, this guy talking about, I should be listening, Did I B, ignore what he said and just went about my business? Or did I C, shut up and listen? I didn't understand. I letter C. I shut up, listened, and began taking notes. As a matter of fact, I still have, I got a notebook. That's one of the things he told me to do. I got a notebook and started taking notes from bigger fish that I welcomed into my pond. One of the things he told me is that if you're the biggest fish in your pond, you need to find a new pond, right? And I'm sure you guys have heard that before, but I did just that. I started looking for bigger fish to be around, like him, who would take the time to mentor me and help raise me up out of my arrogance, right? Because that's a very humbling thing, to be 43 years old and have another man. And by the way, I found out later he's a year younger than I am. But it's a very humbling thing for a man to look you in the eye and basically tell you to shut up and listen. But I encourage you guys, find those people in your life that will take the time to mentor you. But here's the thing, the mentor will appear when the mentee is ready. And that's been said in many different ways, many different times. The mentor will appear when the mentee is ready. See, when I was 43 years old, I was finally ready to be humble and listen to another man. And then help turn my life around. So I share that with you guys because I want you guys, I don't want any of you to wind up like me, to be 51 years old and sitting there crying in front of Walmart across the street from Shorty Isle Park. Let me ask you guys a question. So, none of you have, only two of you raised your hand when I asked you about a strategic plan. Now, everybody in here said they're good with public speaking, right? Okay, I'm gonna let that one slide. I want you to, there was something that I came up with, and this is one of the things I was encouraged to do. Many people have, even John Maxwell has a ton of them, right? Have these little equations or whatever to help you get things done or whatever, or accomplish things in your life. I created one of my own. There were a lot of things that I had to get done, I had to do. So I needed to get them done. But I started thinking about how do you go from things you gotta do, to having them done. And then it came to me, it takes discipline. And then even discipline, I wrote that down. There's the 3 C's of discipline. It takes commitment, being consistent, and you must complete it. How many people know, before I say this, because I know I'm older than you guys, Vince Lombardi, who knows who Vince Lombardi is? Okay. Everybody knows the Super Bowl, right? You know that trophy that they hold up? That's the Vince Lombardi trophy. Vince Lombardi knows a lot about winning. Commitment. Most people fail, not because of lack of desire, but because of a lack of commitment. Vince Lombardi. When it comes down to consistency, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. Success isn't always about greatness. It's about consistency. Consistent hard work leads to success. Greatness will come. Dwayne Johnson. That was the one thing I failed at. When I was younger, I was committed to being better, but I was not consistent. I took classes every once in a while when I was at a corporate, depending which job I was in. I would take an interpersonal effective class or whatever, but I wasn't consistent. I'd take a class this year, skip a couple of years, and all of a sudden I see something or what have you. Because you think about it, if I was consistent, would I have been in the place that I was in when I was 51 years old? I would think not. So you gotta be consistent. Here's another thing, complete. So you gotta have commitment, consistency, and completion. Too many times in my life, I'm speaking for myself, there were many times I started doing something, but I didn't complete it. Don't be satisfied with almost completing a task. Continue until you complete it, no matter how long it takes. There was a story of a woman who took, I think it was 20 years to graduate college. 20 years. She took a class here, a class there, couldn't afford it, but she just kept going at it until she did, right? Too many times in my life anyway, there were times when I just didn't complete something. I started it, but I didn't complete it. And it wasn't until I got into my 40s when I was talking to Mr. Donald Bradley that I began to do just that. I began to commit myself to those things that needed to get done. I began to be consistent with training and bettering myself. And then no matter what it is, if I started it, I completed it. Make sense? I want to open it up to you guys. Oh, one of the things I want to offer you guys, who would like to have coaching? To be able to have, okay, there's a few. I'm going to offer that to 2 people. 2 people will get 6 weeks of free coaching. That starts at like $350 a month, right? Where we spend an hour, 1 week, hour a week, going over whatever it is you want to talk about, your career or what have you, life, and we'll coach you through that. One of the things when I coach, I am not the answer man. I don't want you to look at me, or you should never look at anybody who's coaching you as though they have the answers. The answers are within you. A good coach is going to ask the strategic questions to bring the answers out of you. Does that make sense? So I'm going to offer that to 2 people. But I'm going to open it up to any question that you guys may have. No question?
Derek, you talked about kind of moving from working a job and then stepping into a calling. How did you decipher what the calling was? I mean, maybe there was a tinge of, hey, this is the direction. You even talk about, man, I was afraid to speak in front of people, and now that's kind of the lane that you live in. How did you go from I'm a software engineer to now living in calls?
Awesome question. My wife had a lot to do with that. I was listening to the John Maxwell Leadership Podcast. They had a homework, they were talking about your gifts. And they had a homework assignment to go home and ask your significant other what they thought your gift was. So, my wife can be very blunt. So I was a little hesitant to ask her. Because if I didn't have a gift, she'd say, oh, you ain't got no gift. She'd just tell me. So, after kicking dirt for a while, I walked upstairs and I went into the room. She was sitting there on her laptop and had a phone by her side, which was significant because to get her away from her laptop and her phone is very, very difficult, right? So I said, babe, I gotta ask you a question. She said, what's going on? I said, you know, I'm listening to the John Maxwell Leadership Podcast, and Mark Cole had this homework assignment where he wanted us to ask our wives, significant other, what they thought our gifts were. So I'm asking you, what do you think my gift is? And I really started to pay attention because she shut her laptop and she pushed her phone to the side. And I was like, you know, to get her to do that was like, wow. So I'm sitting there listening, and she says, you know what? I see you on stage inspiring people and adding value to people's lives. She goes, you do a lot of that with me and the kids, even though we get tired of hearing from you all the time. but you always have a nugget or something of value for us to take back. And I began to tear up because I never thought of myself doing what I'm doing now, right? So when she said that, I was just like, wow. She goes, yeah, well, that's what I see you doing. And then she took the laptop, opened it, and she was done, right? But I remember going downstairs to my desk, and I just sat there in the silence and just thought about that. And I prayed about it. I'm a praying man, and I prayed about it. And, you know, the following day, she and I talked about it, and I think it was 2 days later when I joined the John Maxwell team and started down the speaker track. And the rest is history. Yes, sir.
You were talking about the self-SWOT analysis. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you learned when you reflected on that yourself? Would you be willing to share any of that, maybe strengths, weaknesses? opportunities, threats?
Absolutely. One of the biggest weaknesses I had was me, right? I had to get me out of the way. I had a lot of what they used to call stinking thinking. That's those thoughts that get in your mind that say, oh, you can't do that. You can't stand up in front of people. You can't add value to others. Those kinds of things. That was one of the biggest weaknesses I had, was my own thought process. Once I began to push that to the side and tailor that, then it opened up doors to other things. It opened up doors for me to listen to like a person like Donald Bradley and so on and so forth. So the number one weakness I had was myself, right? Strengths is, I would have to say resilience. You know, when you're 14 years old and you're living on the streets of New York, sleeping in pissy staircases and stealing food to eat, and to be able to get out of that and then wind up in detention home and so on and so forth. So one of the strengths I had was I was resilient. You know, I always felt that no matter what came my way, I could overcome it, right? I feel like the Bible tells us we're overcomers. So that was one of the strengths that I had. So I used that overcoming thought process and that strength to help, you know, knock down, go around, or over obstacles in my life. Does that make sense? Opportunities, threats and opportunities way back when, I didn't really see what those threats were, I'll be honest with you. And quite honestly, the SWOT analysis that I did back then, it wasn't called SWOT way back then, but so I was just doing strengths and weaknesses. I didn't really give too much thought to threats. You know, what are those outside things that can prevent me from achieving my goal? For instance, well, actually, you know what? I can say there was one. When I was in high school, when I had a chance for the scholarship, my teammates, they were chasing girls, you know, smoking weed, this, that, and the other. I was a goody two-shoes. Because see, I've already been on the other side. You know, I've been, you know, sleeping on the streets. I've been in a juvenile detention. So when they haven't been there, they don't know what I've been through. So I would have to say that that's one of the things I saw as a threat was peer pressure, right? But really, if you think about it, you can control peer pressure. You can have self-control, and that's one of the things I did. And it's interesting that I'm saying this because a couple of years ago, one of those teammates, we were in a venture together, and he brought up some of the things that we were going through in high school, and how I was a goody two-shoes, this, that, and the other. And I wrote him a letter just breaking it down, like, hey, I had to get that scholarship. I had to get out of, you know, living in, you know, Queens, New York, and get away from the hood and so on and so forth. I wanted to go into college at Bryant University. I think out of the 10 blacks that were on the campus, 6 of us were on the basketball team, okay? So it was definitely culture shock, okay? But I knew that would be better for me, you know? And I basically had to get away from that environment and to be out there in the middle of nowhere in Rhode Island. That was a blessing in disguise. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, one more off that. You said that your weakness was like bad thinking,
Yeah.
and you said you had to kind of put that to the side.
Correct.
What was that like, how did you put that stuff to the side? Because obviously that's been in there for a while, so how did you put that to the side to free you up?
When I think about it, it comes down to a decision. Many times in our lives, we think of things like that, like the stinking thinking and what have you, and we think of it, it's a process. How you know, it's going to be a process to change my mind and change the way I think. For me, things came down to a decision. Just like when I made the decision to follow Christ, right? I didn't have to go through a process. It was just like, hey, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. You know, when those thoughts came in, I quickly replaced them with something positive. Does that make sense? So that's one of the things that I had to do. I had to replace those thoughts, and I had to be very intentional about that. You know, it's not something that change is not going to just happen. You have to be intentional about making those kinds of changes. So whenever I would recognize that I started thinking that way, I quickly would toss it to the side and replace it with something positive. For instance, you know, the night before we were called on the big stage, I was nervous as crap. I couldn't eat. And I'm being honest, no, wait, I'm gonna kill it. I started telling myself, I'm replacing those thoughts, those negative thoughts with positive ones, right? I started thinking about standing there in front of 3,000 people and freezing. But then I said, no, you know what, I'm gonna kill it. Matter of fact, I cracked a couple of jokes, you know, and it's nothing like the energy of a crowd. When you crack a joke, and let's say 2,000 people laughing and having a good time, let me tell you something, killed it. I ain't gonna lie, I killed it. But it started with me making the decision to get rid of all that stinking thinking and be intentional about replacing those negative thoughts with positive ones.
So can you speak to some of like the day-to-day things that maybe you did back then, and then also things that maybe you still do to this day, like whether it's daily routine, rituals, things that like maybe helped you, because maybe some of those things will help us too.
Absolutely. I do have a routine, right? My routine is somewhat flexible. It's not like a robot, right? But I'm big into meditation and prayer, right? I'm big into Bible study. I like starting my day off right. My wife and I, she's got me into doing a lot of exercise and eating better. She told me when we got married that I had to last until I was at least 75. Now, you can interpret what last meant. But, so she's really big into health, fitness. Right now she has us on this keto diet, something like that.
Right.
I said, look, I'm not doing the full keto, okay? I need to have some muffins every once in a while. You know, I'm a donut guy, you know, so I gotta have my cheat day, that kind of thing. But I would have to say that having a routine really helps, because not only that, but you gotta be accountable to somebody. So it's not just having routine, but there's times when she'll come up and say, hey, did you do blah, blah, blah? Because I'm accountable to her. Because sometimes, you know, you can always cheat yourself, right? You can always, oh, well, nobody's around, I can do this. But when you're accountable to somebody else, that's a whole different ballgame. So I would say the routine and being accountable to her in my routine has really helped. And I didn't have, and you mentioned earlier on I didn't have a routine. I was just, whatever, you know, I got up and just did whatever throughout my day. Now I jokingly say that if we don't put sex on the calendar, it may not happen. I gotta have my calendar. Don't tell her, hey. Yeah.
As you're being recorded. As you're cut that out.
The biggest laugh is the one that gets edited out. Right? But seriously, having the right person in my life was huge. Now I'm remarried, and no knock against my ex-wife. She's a beautiful person. We just didn't work out. But having Robin in my life has been absolutely phenomenal, because how do you come home to a wife? You're the breadwinner. When I say breadwinner, meaning that I was paying all the bills and so on and so forth, 6-figure salary, yada, yada, yada. And you say, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna do something else. And I'll be honest with you, at first she was just like, okay, what is that gonna look like, But then a couple of days later, she said, you know what, Derek? I have faith in God. I have faith in you. Let's do it.
Wow.
And that was it. Once I heard that, it's a wrap. So having the right person in your life. So those of you who aren't married, take your time. Make sure you find the right person. Yes, sir? Okay.
Oh, I was gonna ask, just kind of building on that, because you kind of answered half my question right there. But, like, I'm in a position, I feel like you did at 51 a little bit, like where I have a thing, but my biggest hurdle right now to make a switch to a totally different career that I want to move to, is just like I feel secure with the money I'm making, and like I got to support, the household and stuff like that. So I guess, like, how did you give up like a 6-figure job, double-digit salary, just to go to something you don't know what it's gonna bring you?
The first word that comes to mind is faith. I'll be honest with you, because it's taken a lot of faith, and because it's not like, and remember, we had COVID now, right? So the pocket has been hit significantly, for speaking engagements and so on and so forth. And just like I'm speaking now, but I'm not getting paid for this, right? So the thing is, it took a lot of faith, for my wife and I to sit back and say, okay, how are we gonna do this? And we took a leap of faith. And that's basically where. Good, thank you, appreciate you. But I will tell you, because I've been in your shoes, and there were times when I was in my 30s and I was thinking about making that change, but I got stuck in, well, I have the kids in private school, got a mortgage, but you know what, I let that thinking stop me from thinking about those opportunities, right? And I never thought about opportunities. I never thought about how can I pivot, how can I do something, how can I, do some type of training, right? That can put me on track so that maybe I can transition into that new position, right? Now, it was easier for me to walk away right now because my sons are, well, 3 of them are out of school. The one that is, he's on scholarship. So that helps, right? I don't have to pay for all this, pay for him to go to school. So of course, being, in my 50s and being able to make that change is a lot different than being in my 30s and having 2 kids in private school, where you gotta use wisdom, right? Faith is great, but the Bible says wisdom is the principal thing. So you gotta use wisdom and be smart about that. So don't look at what I did and say, you know what, I'm gonna do it dirty. I'm gonna go home and tell my wife, you know what, I'm gonna do blah, blah, blah. No, don't do that. I always say take things, to the Lord in prayer and really think about those opportunities and threats, things that are threatening, your current livelihood or what have you. How can you pivot, take advantage of some opportunity? Like I said, even just going to class at night, it's going to take some sacrifice. You're not going to be able to, jump from this to that without there being some level of sacrifice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kind of similar question off of that, but you said that you stepped from your career to your calling and you did it a little bit later in life, and now your calling, it sounds like, is based largely on your experience thus far. So if you would have stepped into calling in your 20s or 30s, do you think that would have looked differently, or do you think it's important to pay your dues career-wise beforehand?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. And quite honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it would have looked like. As I was telling someone earlier today, the Titanic, everybody knows about the Titanic. If somebody, they said, I think who it was, but he said if the Titanic would have moved the rudder about 2 inches hours before, the whole story would have been different. They wouldn't have hit the iceberg. So see, if you do something earlier in your life, it could change the trajectory of your life. So like if he would have made that one change, the captain would have made that one little change hours earlier, the whole story would have been different. It would have been about people running to the balconies and taking pictures of this as they're passing this big giant iceberg, right? So one little change earlier on, who knows? Maybe I'd be competing with John Maxwell right now, making 6 figures for 90 minutes. But that's a good question. And that's why I said you gotta take things in prayer, because don't follow what somebody else does, because everybody's situation is different. Make sense? Awesome.
Derek, you talked about fulfillment and the lack of fulfillment in your previous career, one of the things that led you to shift. So are you fulfilled now? And if so, what are the tangible markers that you see in your life of fulfillment that this is it, like this is my calling?
Awesome. And believe it or not, there was a time when money was the answer to that question. Now it's about adding value to others. I was telling somebody I love it when I see those little light bulbs go off. I did a training about a month ago where I had 38 leaders of an organization on teaching about, we're going over diversity and inclusion. And it's pretty interesting. You have, Zoom is great. Okay? As a speaker, when you are in front of an audience of any size, there's always an energy exchange, right? The laughs, the chuckles, the eye contact, or whatever, there's an energy exchange. When you're on a Zoom call, and I had 38 people on this call, 38 leaders in this organization, going over diversity and inclusion, but you got to scroll through all the little squares, make sure everybody's engaged. You have to keep your energy very, very high, right? That lasted for 2.5 hours. When I was finished with that call, I was almost wanting to fall out. But what got me through it, to answer your question, was to see those little light bulbs go on. As I answer someone's question, or I ask them a question and they're able to see the answer for themselves, and they're like, wow, I get it, Adding value to somebody's life is the barometer for me, And where before it was the 6-figure salary, the nice car, house, kids in private school, that kind of thing, that really doesn't mean much to me anymore. It's being able to add value to others, and I would have to say that's where my barometer is. Sir?
So, obviously, when you're talking about adding value to others, those are going to be some frictional conversations every now and then, right?
Yep.
So when you're dealing with polarizing subject matter, especially in a group of people, how do you find best to bring those people to an even playing field, kind of bring them to the same page?
Awesome. That brings up another thing. that I'm working on. I have Higgs Leadership Development. There's the Sapphire Youth Development Center. And there's now another project I have called Voice Up. Voice Up is a platform for people to voice up and affect real change. That's where it started with me getting 10 men in a room. And you're talking about polarizing conversations. So I got 10 men in a room. We were socially distanced and different ethnicities. I had 4 police officers. And we talked about things that are affecting our society today. Racism, and polarization, Democrat, Republican, need I say more? So we got these men in a room, and I facilitated a conversation with these 10 men. We laid some ground rules, and one of the best ways that I've found to lead and facilitate a conversation like that is that I have to do it from the middle. I can't choose sides, right? And whenever I do interject, I always ask permission. But there are things that I've been through that may add value to the conversation, been through as a Black person in this country. So one of the best ways of facilitating a conversation when you have polarizing viewpoints is to lead it and facilitate it from the middle and not take sides. And the key thing is to listen to the other person's perspective. That's the whole thing behind Voice Up, right? You have 2 ears, 1 mouth, which means you should be listening twice as much as you speak. In our country right now, we have a lot of people who are talking at each other, but not listening to each other. Make sense? So one of the things that I find is that we can just give people a chance to talk and just listen and hear their perspective. I'll give you an example. In one of those facilitated conversations, a gentleman, white gentleman, he said, somehow we got on the topic and the Trayvon Martin case came up. And he just said, hey, as far as I'm concerned, Trayvon Martin got what he deserved. So you can imagine how some of the Black folks in that room felt about that comment, right? But I said, hold on, let's hear what he has to say. So, and getting everybody to settle down and hear what his perspective. We were able to, number one, he was a military guy. His wife was a cop, his dad was a cop. So he's looking at everything from that perspective and from that lens. And one of the things I talk about at the beginning is that we all have a different lens that we look through. The Black man in this country, there are things that I've experienced that many of you probably haven't. And even if you did, it would be from a different perspective than me, right? Getting pulled over by a cop. I have been, all 3 of my sons have been. And out of the 4 of us, 3 of us have had very negative interactions. And one of us could have wound up being like let's say a Trayvon Martin or one of these, Orlando Castillo or what have you. So the key thing is sitting back and allowing yourself to listen to the perspective of another individual. And I think that's one of the things that's missing in our country right now.
I agree.
Anything else? And you guys are young. Don't y'all have a curfew or something?
That's good. I want to help respect time, but can we give it up for Derek?